Hi, my name is Jeff Lachelle. I'm a youth volleyball coach here in Northern California. And for several years now, I've been running what I've been calling Rules and Rotations Clinic. And really, the focus of that clinic is to acquaint parents with individual skills for their players, whether their youth player is going into junior high and playing there, or high school and playing there, or has made a club team and is playing there. So we're going to be focusing on six-person volleyball, and this is applicable to boys or girls. There's some nuances to the game back and forth, but really the things that we're going to be discussing are applicable to either. So we're going to go over some individual skill stuff, and then we'll go over some team concepts and alignments, and hopefully maybe a couple of rules calls and stuff along the way. This is going to be fairly conversational. I don't anticipate editing a whole lot, and I'm not going to use any graphics. So this is like my office, and you're going to get straight through until this is done. So I'm not editing. All right, here we go. So we're going to start with a half of the court. We really, for the purposes of this demonstration, we really only care about what's happening on our side of the court. So this is the net. This is what we call the 10-foot line or the 3-meter line, but we're not international, we're in America. So that's the 10-foot line. Generally, from kind of here back is called the defensive zone, and this is the attack zone. But when we start off, we've got 6 players in these positions, okay? And what we'll do first is talk about where the positions or where the players will play, and then we'll start talking about kind of how they move and how they align. But the first thing I want to do is talk about kind of those positions and what the requirements for those positions are. And the reason I like to start there is so that if parents want to know, or if a player says, hey, I want to be an outside hitter, well, what does that mean for their development? What do they have? What kind of skills do they have to have? And if they don't have those skills, but they have other skills, or they have other kind of physical attributes, then what does that mean? Where can they go and kind of maximize what they have or how they're developing or whatever? So we are going to start with this position here. That is an outside hitter. It's front row on the left side. So here's the net, here's an outside hitter position. So we'll just go OH. Outside hitters kind of carry the workload of the offense. And you'll see as we go on, the game is generally played right to left. So as we set a ball, the setter generally lines up looking from right to left. And we don't always get perfect passes in any level of this game. So as you're set up right to left, the majority of the balls are going to go to the outside hitter. That's just kind of the way the game is set up. And what that means is your outside hitters carry the bulk of the offense for your team. So that means outside hitters are generally aggressive, athletic, and they terminate. So meaning when they get up and hit a ball or they tip a ball, they can put the ball on the ground with good efficacy. They can terminate, they can end a play. They can hit really hard, or they can hit really smart, or they can tip really smart. But they're the ones that you want to set to so that you can have them hit a ball, end a play, get a point. Outside hitters generally are good passers as well. They're as good as your defensive specialists or your liberos. The reason for that is that they drop back in serve receive, and we'll talk about a little bit about that later. But they drop back and they're expected to pass and serve receive, and they're also expected to pass on this left side of the defense when we're in defense, when the other team has the ball and they're about to attack. Our outside hitters need to dig. They need to hit. They need to pass hard hit balls. So outside hitters, if you have a player who wants to be an outside hitter, outside hitters are generally the best in terms of their efficacy, so their hitting percentages, which, when you're just starting out, you don't care about that. But is your player one of the people that can hit the ball with great effect, or do they hit it into the net or out all the time? Outside hitters carry the bulk of that load. And then, is your player a good passer? If your player is a good passer, then they can play defense in the back row as well, and generally outside hitters play kind of all the way around. There are exceptions to this, obviously, but that's the general rule. So if you have a player that wants to be an outside hitter, they need to be a good hitter, and they also need to be a good passer, generally some of the best on the team. Okay, Next is a middle, and that's a middle blocker or a middle hitter. Middles, we just call them middles. These are people who are responsible generally for blocking the opposing team. So this middle will block their middle here, or will go over here and block their outside hitter, or will go over here and block their right side hitter. So middles need to get along the net fairly quickly. So as a result, a lot of times you put your tall athletic kids in the middle because they've got long legs and long arms, and so they can cover a lot of ground a lot more quickly. So if your player is athletic and tall and can get along the net laterally quickly, then middle blocker is a really good position for them. If they have a large vertical leap, that's also helpful. But in general, middle blocker is a place for kids who are tall and who move quickly along the net. Particularly if they are good offensively, good defensively above the level of the net. They get up and hit hard, they get up and block really well, but they don't necessarily pass well. Middle blocker is a good position for them because what ends up happening is when they go to the back row, we usually sub in a defensive specialist, and we'll get to that a little bit later too. But middle blocker is tall, often, not always, but tall, athletic, quick along the net, good blocking, good nose for the ball. They know where it's going to be set, or they can read that really quickly, and they can get there and block the ball. And they're also part of the quick offense, which is, we'll talk about that a little bit later too, but that's generally middles. So if you have a kid who meets those criteria, middle blocker might be a good place for her or him to start or to develop. Okay. That brings us over here to right side. So depending on the offense that you're running, this could be a right side player. It could be an opposite. It could actually be a setter. But we're just going to call this right side. Right sides are usually players that are tall. You're catching a theme. They're tall. They jump well and block well, because what we want to do is block the outside hitter on the other team. We want to be able to block their what's called a line swing, which is a swing, an attack down this line. We want right sides to be tall. We want them to put up a big block. If they can hit, that's a bonus. And depending on the way your particular team and coach plays the game, a right side could also be a secondary setter. So if you've got a player who's generally tall or has a good athletic jump, has a good hop, can put up a big block, but might not necessarily be quickest along the net like these middles. So if you've got a kid who's like, we call baby giraffe, right? Tall kids who are growing into their bodies and can jump, but aren't necessarily coordinated yet. They haven't grown into their bodies, or they're just generally not fleet of foot anyway, but they can put up a big presence on the net. Right side is a really good place for them. And they don't necessarily need to have good hands either. We can have other players step in and take that secondary setter position if our setter takes the first ball. So if you're looking for if your player has those kinds of skills or physical attributes, then right side might be a good place for him or her. Okay, moving around, we generally play this position as setter. So setters are the people who take a pass. The first contact is a pass, whether it's overhand or underhand. The first contact is a pass. The second contact is a set. So our setters distribute the ball to one of those three hitters in the front row, whether it's an outside hitter, a middle, or a right side. Setters want to distribute the ball to the most effective hitter. So setters are generally kind of our floor captains, our quarterbacks. They're the people that get the ball to the person that's going to be most effective at terminating that ball, ending that point in our favor. So setters are very fast. They need to be all over the court because a lot of times we don't get perfect passes, but we still need to get our setter to touch that second ball. Our offense generally runs on the setter being able to get to the ball and then set that ball with effectiveness. So setters are generally girls, boys, men, women who are fast. They're athletic. They can get there to the ball. They're aggressive because they have it in their mind that they're going to get to that ball. So when teams look around, they're not wondering who is going to go get that second touch, even if it's like off into the ether somewhere. Setters are the ones that go get that. So they're athletic. They're aggressive. They have good hands. That's kind of a prerequisite. Setters need to use their setting hands. So they have to control the ball cleanly on that second touch. And then generally, they're pretty intelligent too. What they do is identify the most effective hitters, and that changes within a game, sometimes point to point, sometimes instant to instant. But setters have to recognize that. So they have to kind of go with the flow of the game and know which hitter is hot, which blockers are not on the other side, which areas of the court are problematic for the other side's defense. And then setters set the ball to the hitter that can exploit those weaknesses. So if you've got a kid who doesn't necessarily need to be tall, and really they don't, when they're just starting out, nobody has really great setting hands. But if they're athletic and they like to kind of quarterback, setter might be a really good position for that player. Okay. Here we have generally a defensive specialist. Sometimes you could have, depending on the defense that you run, the offense you run, you could have a defensive specialist here, or you can have a defensive specialist here. For purposes of this conversation, we'll have defensive specialist here and then a libero on the other side. So a defensive specialist is somebody that comes in the back row. They substitute in for one of the front row players, and they come in and play the back row. And usually we do this for middles because, again, one of the criteria for middles are they don't necessarily need to be the best passers. If they're good at blocking, great at hitting, and they're really good passers, then they generally occupy that outside hitter spot. Middles generally go in or come out of the game, and defensive specialists come in. So that's where we can get the kids that are, and these are the criteria for DSs or defensive specialists. DSs are generally really good passers because that's what they do. They don't necessarily need to be good hitters. They don't necessarily need to be good setters, but they do have to be very aggressive and very mobile, and they have to have good ball control because everything starts for us when the ball crosses the plane of the net. Everything starts for us with that pass. That first pass sets everything else up. So we want defensive specialists who, if they have the ability to read ahead of the play and get themselves in position, that's fantastic. At a young age, that takes a while to kind of build that skill set. So what you're looking for is kids who, when the ball comes to them, and if they go get it, great, but when the ball comes to them, they're able to pass the ball effectively. And that's generally kind of 20 feet high and 5 feet off the net. That's our goal. It doesn't always happen, but if they can pass the ball 20 feet feet high and 10 feet off the net when they're 12s or 13s, that's fantastic. We can, any team would be happy to run an offense out of that at a fairly young age. So defensive specialists are girls, boys, men, women who come in the back row and pass to start our offensive sequences. There are specialized defensive specialists called liberos, however we pronounce it, I don't know. But you can say DS/L. Liberos are men, women, boys, girls who wear a different color jersey. And the purpose for that is we don't have to use a substitution to bring a libero in, and a libero can go in for anybody else. So when we have say we were bringing our middle into the back row and we're subbing that middle for a defensive specialist, those two players have established what's called parity, and they can only go in for each other after that. That's it. So this defensive specialist could come in for a middle, but once they've gone in for that middle, they can't go in for like the other middle or another outside hitter. They're locked into going into that position and that position only. A libero is a specialized position where that player can go in for anybody at any time in the back row. So you could pull a libero out for middle one play and put them right back in for an outside hitter. The kind of the flip side of that is liberos are not ever allowed to play in the front row. So as you'll see, especially for you parents who are new to the game and kids that are new to the game and coaches are watching, 6 players on the court and maybe another 6 on the sidelines and things get crazy. DSs sometimes accidentally sneak into the front row. We'll rotate, we'll get a side out, we'll get the ball back. You'll notice that our middle goes back to serve, which means this other DS accidentally just kind of has to rotate to the front row. That's okay if it's a DS. It happens sometimes and it's all right. If it's a libero, it's not. And you'll see this by a referee, which means out of rotation. So that's an illegal formation when you have a libero starting the point in the front row. That's not legal. So there's a couple more kind of nuances to how liberos can play, but really the important thing to know for parents just getting into the sport is that liberos are just specialized DSs. A lot of times they're kind of your best passer, your most aggressive passer. A lot of times they can be a captain too, like a floor captain. Because they can be very communicative. They can tell people where the ball is going to be hit. They step in front of other players to pass a ball because they just have those skills. So if you've got a kid who is aggressive and good at passing the ball and they just like to go kind of chase it down wherever it is, libero/DS might be a really good position for that player. So we can play a DS or a libero in either position in the back row, either middle back or left back. Generally, setters play that right back position, and the reason for that is, again, the game is generally designed to flow right to left. So setters start here, and then once the pass is made, they're going to move up to somewhere here and be facing to the left side of the court, and they'll either deliver the ball to the outside hitter here, looking straight forward, or they'll deliver the ball to the middle right here, setting straight up, or they'll make a back set, fancy back set, to the right side here. So those are the basics of the player positions. I hope they provide some context for when you come in and have a player that's interested in playing one of those positions or has no idea what position they want to play, but they have some kind of physical attributes or skill sets that you see and they have, then that's kind of how you can determine or how you can kind of conceptualize where they could be first, where they can start out. Okay, so those are the player kind of roles. We're going to talk about player positioning now, and this is where things get kind of confusing. So what ends up happening is we have 6 different rotations. There's 6 players on the court. And if we just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, because we're going to rotate every time we side out, which means we lose a point and the other team gets a chance to serve. When they lose that point, then we get the ball back and we get to serve, but we have to rotate every time that happens. So when we get a side out, we rotate. So since we have 6 players, you could see that we have 6 different opportunities for alignments of those players. So in this rotation, this person here in service or in court position 1 would be serving. Well, if we side it out to them and they side it back out to us, then this person here, as we rotate 1, would be the second server. This number 2 would come down here into this court position and be the server, which means everybody rotates 1 click over. So, that having been said, what we're going to do is set up a team how you would set it up on the court. So generally, coaches will have their server, their first server be their setter. That's just kind of typical. Some coaches will change it up, but a lot of coaches will just put their setter right here. So we've got a setter here. And then we've got generally an outside hitter who starts here, and a middle who starts here, and then we've got a right side over here, and then we have our other outside hitter and our other middle. Okay, now none of this makes sense, right? Because we've got a middle in the middle, but we've got an outside hitter on the right side, and we've got a right side on the left side. The reason this works like this is because you have to have the opposing or the opposite player on the diagonal opposite of the court. So, and the reason for that is we want those same personnel even though it's a different person, it's the same player responsibility in the front row at all times. So what I mean by that is we have a setter here, and then the setter's opposite is a right side, which could really be another setter. When they rotate around, this setter would go here, here, and here. And in those same 3 rotations, this right side would go here, here, and then back here. Which means anytime in any given rotation, we have a right side, a middle, and an outside in the front row. And we have a setter or a right side, the other right side, a middle, and an outside hitter in the back row. So at any given time, we have all 3 positions in the front row that have been accounted for. So this would be, say, rotation 1, right? Outside hitter, we would call this rotation 1. So setter, outside hitter, middle, right side, middle, outside hitter. If we advance this 1, what we have is an outside hitter who is now serving. The setter has moved over 1, right? Our middle has moved over 1. We have our right side or our other setter here. Our other outside hitter has moved into the front row, and our other middle has advanced 1. So you can see that these players from rotation 1 have just rotated 1 more, okay? So this is rotation 2. But we still have an outside hitter, a right side, and a middle, okay? So we have all 3 players in the front row, but as you can see, they're not in their correct playing positions. This outside hitter is in rotation 2, but the middle is now switched with the right side, which happens because, as you can see, if we rotate this 1 more, we just move this middle down here, we move this right side over, we move this outside hitter over, we have the other middle who was here moved up to the front row, and now we've got the setter in this position and the other outside hitter here. So you can see the setter and the right side are still opposite each other, the outside hitters are still opposite each other, the middles are still opposite each other, so that every time we rotate, we have 1 player in 1 position, outside hitter, middle, right side, going to the back row, and they're opposite, the same person that plays that position, but in the back row, is going to the front row. So, as long as that's not too confusing, I have no feedback. I have no idea if it is, but I hope it's not. The other thing that we would do is for those DS and liberos, in this rotation, this would be like rotation 3, a DS libero would come in for this middle and maybe serve for that middle, maybe come in after the middle serves, but then substitute in and then play these 3 back row positions. So if what you're seeing on the court as you start to watch the game is your player is a middle, and they serve and then come out of the game immediately, or they come out of the game before they serve and somebody else comes in for them, that's likely a DS that's coming in for your player who is a middle, or a middle who is playing front row for your child who's a DS. So that's the way that works. Let's see. This also leads to serve-receive positioning, which I think we should go over a little bit, and it can be confusing, but if you get some basic rules and some kind of a couple of basic concepts for what we try to do, and especially in serve-receive, then it'll help. So we have, let's say, just rotation 1, setter, outside hitter, middle, right side, outside hitter, and middle. Okay, here's the rule, regardless of where these players are, whether it's rotation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, the rule is that players cannot be on the other side of adjacent players. You have to maintain your spatial integrity. So this setter cannot line up on the other side of this middle. This setter cannot line up in front of this outside hitter. And it's just how the game is, and it makes a lot of sense, because if you could do that, you would just have your players line up regardless of rotation. You would just have them line up where they're best utilized, and then it would kind of spoil kind of the nuance of the game, how the game is supposed to be played. So what you're going to see when we start this is players will move around to align themselves for serve receive. And there's really kind of three things we try to do, and I think this is universal. There are three things that you try to do with serve receive positioning, because you want to, as you're receiving the ball, you want to put your team in a good position to hit the ball. So the three things we try to do in order are we get our setter out of the way, because remember, our setter isn't somebody we want passing the ball. Our setter is somebody we want taking that second ball and distributing it so that our hitters can hit. So we need to get our setter out of the way. That's rule number one. Rule number two is we want to have our best passers in a position to pass the ball. And then rule three is we want to have our outside hitter in a position to hit the ball as quickly as possible. Now in this rotation, that would be almost impossible. We could do like this stack thing, but generally that's not the way it works. Generally in this rotation, what you'll see is this setter will either move up and push this outside hitter out of the way, or more likely this outside hitter, I'll just make an arrow, this outside hitter will drop back. So what you'll have is an outside hitter standing right here and a setter standing right there, because you can see that this setter is still behind the outside hitter, or can be even with him or her, but generally they're standing kind of next to and just slightly behind this outside hitter. So we've moved our setter out of the way. Our setter is kind of shielded. If there's a ball that is served directly at the setter, the outside hitter will just step over and pass it. We also have, so that's rule one. Rule two is that we have our three best passers ready to receive the first ball. So we have an outside hitter who's a good passer, and we have a middle who is probably at this point a DS or a libero, so one of those specialized passing positions. And we have our other outside hitter. So we have our setter out of the way, rule one. We have our three best passers available to hit, that's rule two. We do not have our outside hitter in a position to hit, but our outside hitter in this alignment can take the first ball with a back set, which is called a five. So we've kind of fulfilled the criteria for one and two. What we end up doing is pushing the right side and the middle. So our middle will be kind of like this, and our right side will be kind of like this. So in this rotation, what we would do is have our right side take the first outside hitter attack, which is just really a left side attack. Our right side player is already there. So what happens is, as the ball is served, one of these three players ideally passes the ball. The setter will release and come up to this area, which is our passing target. So we hope that we would pass the ball there. Our setter meets the ball there and then sets the ball either to this right side or to a middle or to an outside hitter on the backside. And then as soon as the ball is away, as soon as we've hit the ball, we've passed the ball over, we've just gotten rid of it, right? We want to send it over the net. Hopefully we just get the point. But if we don't and play continues, then what happens is these players, this outside hitter and this right side, will switch. So for the rest of the point, the outside hitter will play outside and the right side player will play on the right side. Okay? And I don't really want to go through all six of them. Really, there's kind of three. If you're playing a 6-2, whatever, there's three rotations with back row setters. And then if you're only playing with one setter, you could have three front row rotations with the setters. So your serve receive alignments will be different, but the nuances aren't really what I'm trying to get across. I don't want you to have to memorize where everybody's going to stand in serve receive in all six serve receive possible alignments, right? And then there's permutations off those as well. The point is when you're looking at the game and wondering, why are those kids crowded over there and why are these kids over here and why do those kids have to push to this side of the net and why is my player a right side player playing way over on the left and taking the first hit on the left side, it's for these reasons. Because wherever our personnel are, we want to try and accomplish those three things in serve receive. We need to get our setter out of the way so he or she can take the second ball and not the first. We want to make sure we have our three best passers in position to pass that ball so that we have the best chance possible of running an offense. And then we want to make sure that we get our hitters aligned so that they can take the first ball and terminate, hopefully bounce the ball off the floor or somebody else's head or whatever. So that is the basics of serve receive. And I think that's the basics of some rotations as well. The last thing I guess I'll talk about is depending on your personnel, depending on what kind of kids you have on your team, what their skill sets are, how many you have on your team, honestly, you could run one of three, but generally two different offenses. So one is called a 4-2, and you'll see this a lot in like junior high when teams don't have a long season and they don't have a ton of training time, or maybe you've got a volunteer parent that doesn't know how to coach a more complex offense, and no shame at all, because that happens a lot, and God bless those people. It's fantastic. But what you end up getting is just a hitter, and a setter, and then three defensive players in the back row. This is generally called a 4-2, and what that means is you have four hitters and two setters, and really it'd be kind of a right side set would be fine, still a 4-2. As these players rotate around, you just keep this setter on this right side. So you can play a front row setter in this position. You can do this with different personnel. So instead of having a setter designated, you just run it out of this right side position. So whoever's actually playing that position at any given time can just set the ball. And I think we generally refer to this as a 4-2. There are not a lot of teams that run that, because what you end up doing is giving up that as a hitting position. At least you give up that as a hitting position for the entirety of the game. The other two ways to run an offense are a 5-1 and a 6-2. I guess we better put 4-2 up there as well. A 5-1 is where you have one setter, and that setter plays all the way around. So no matter whether they're back row or front row, they play these three positions as setter, and then they go to the front row and they play all three of these positions as setter as well. The benefit of this is if you have a particularly tall or aggressive, good hitting, a setter that can dump the ball, which means goes up and makes it look like they're going to set the ball on the second contact, but then just attacks it and puts it down on the second contact. Those are all good things. If you've got a setter that's tall and can block this right side, so defensively they could go block outside hitters instead of bringing in somebody different for your setter. So if you've got a particularly tall, athletic setter, or if you just have one setter on your team, if you have one person that meets those criteria and really nobody else can come in and effectively run your offense, then you would run a 5-1. And it's called a 5-1 because you have 5 hitters and one setter. Because whenever that setter is in the front row, there's only 2 other hitters. For the 3 rotations that the setter's in the front row, there's only 2 other people there, which means you only have 5 hitters. For all 6 rotations, 5 hitters, because the setter's in the front row for 3 of them. A 6-2 is where you run the setter out of the back row, and when the setter goes to the front row, so we start them here in rotation 1, and then they move to here, rotation 2, they move to here, rotation 3. When they go to the front row, the person that was in the front row opposite them, so that could be a right side, it could be just another setter who was playing right side, playing offense and blocking, but not setting in the front row. When that player comes to the back row, or you can sub out, then you have another setter, a different girl, boy, man, woman, that comes into the back row and plays setter for those other 3 positions. So you always have a back row setter in a 6-2. It's always these 3 positions that are a setter, And these three positions, as the setter moves around, are right side players. So they're actually hitters or blockers. That's what they focus on, this area of their game that they focus on. They don't set the ball from the front row. So you would run a 6-2 if you have lots of people that can set. You have tons of people on your team, because if you have a 6-2, then what happens is you can substitute your setters for right side players when they get to the front row, which means you automatically get 4 girls, boys, men, women in the game instead of 2. So because if you just had setters and they just played all the way around, then there's 2 people that play that position. But if you substitute for each of them, front row, back row, then you get 4 people in the game, which means if you have a big team and you're looking for ways to get kids into the game, that's a really good one. And especially if you have multiple players that can set, then you want to develop them as setters, especially young kids. Then it's generally good. Most of the time I run a 6-2, just for exactly those reasons. You want to develop kids. You want to make sure that kids that are interested in setting have the opportunity to set, and kids that are interested in playing front row have the opportunity to play front row. The only downside if you're a parent is if you have, a rock star kid and that kid is really good and that kid wants to play both front row and back row, and this happens sometimes, then what you'll see is they get subbed out either in the front row or the back row. So they're playing the 3 positions, but then that's it. And then they'll come back in again when the next 3 rotations are done. They'll come back in when if your player is right side, when the setter goes around, your player will come in. When your setter goes to the back row, or when your player goes to the back row, the setter will come in, and you'll see that other player play for 3 positions. So those are opportunities for to talk about how team play is important, and sharing the court is important, and developing other kids are important, because you just never know who's going to go to the Olympics in 10 years and who's going to not. So those are the basics of a 4-2, which you probably won't see much unless you're watching this and or have a kid who is going into junior high. A 5-1 or a 6-2, which most of you will see starting out. I think that is pretty much all we're going to go over. There are a ton of videos out there about the basics of gameplay, about how volleyball is played, about the positioning, about a whole lot more detail. I usually, if this is live, I go over referees' calls and we mix stuff like that in too. I don't think I'm going to go through that. But in general, maybe I will go through it. In general, if you have a kid who is a setter, this is the one that's called a lot, and they contact the ball with both hands at different times, that's called a double. So you'll see a referee blow the whistle and do this. That means there's a double contact on the set. So that is a rule violation. If you see a player do this, which we have players do sometimes, a referee will blow the whistle and do this, which means extended contact or a lift or a carry. That just means you're not allowed to grab the ball, carry the ball, have extended contact with the ball. The expectation is that you pass it, which is a brief contact, you set it, which is a brief contact, you hit it or block it, which is a brief contact. So there's doubles, there's lifts. Sometimes you'll see the referee blow the whistle and just kind of gently point at or touch the side of the net. That means net violation. You're not allowed to touch the net when you're playing. You're also not allowed to go under the net. And these rules change from year to year, and whether you're playing kind of club volleyball or high school volleyball, there's different sets of rules. As in years past, you were not allowed to touch the net at all. And then they changed it for a while, and in some leagues and clubs and to the rule to be that you could touch the net if you were not part of the play, and the net contact was kind of incidental. If if a girl turned and her ponytail brushed the net, that's not a net violation, even though she technically touched the net. Or if you're on the other side of the net and your arm away from a block play that's going on right now, and your arm brushes the net, they didn't call that a net because it's not a part of the play. It doesn't have anything to do with the game. There was no advantage gained or anything like that. those rules have gone back and forth, but the point is, if you're a parent and you're watching the game and you see the referee touch the net, that means net violation. Somebody generally jumped, tried to make a block or tried to make a hit, and touched the top of the net with their hands. A lot of times, like boys volleyball, you'll see them try to come down on the net like they're Donkey Kong smashing something. So you'll see that a lot. That's a net violation. If a player goes under the net, they have usually a full foot under the net that crosses the center line. That's a violation, and you'll see them point at the line indicating that that's an under the net violation. And that's generally a safety call, because you don't want players who are simultaneously jumping, one of them coming under the net and the other one coming down and kind of come down on a foot and rolling an ankle or something like that. So those are safety calls. There's a ton of other calls in volleyball, but those are the ones that people question the most. An interesting note about doubles is you can double contact the first pass, and that is not a rule violation. So especially hard hit balls, I think that's why they put the rule in the way they did. A lot of times on hard hit balls, you may have a ball go off one arm and then the other quickly on a dig, especially as you get to higher levels of volleyball. It just happens fast, and you may get double contact. So the rule is, for as long as I've been playing volleyball, you can actually legally double contact the first ball. So if you'll see a libero or a defensive specialist go to touch it, go to pass the ball on the first contact, and they go like this, and it just comes out ugly, but nobody calls it, you'll hear parents from the other side, not you, because you watched this video, you'll hear them screaming, that's a double, that's a double. But on first contact, you can legally double contact the first ball. Then what'll happen, inevitably, is a setter will go to set the ball, and it will be a double, and the referee will call it, and opposing parents, not you, will be very angry because there was a double contact that was called by the referee, and there was a double contact that was not called by the referee because it wasn't a rule violation. I think that is about it. I think that's probably enough time, enough talking, enough volleyball for now. I will probably, I don't know how this thing works, leave some things down there so you can, like my contact information, you can feel free to leave comments. You can feel free to ask me questions in the comments. Like I said, there are a ton of coaches out. There's a ton of information about volleyball. But what I wanted to do was recreate in video what I've been doing every year, which is really just trying to focus on what parents need to know and what parents might find useful as their kids start playing volleyball. So thank you very much for your time and attention. Best of luck in your volleyball season and with your child's volleyball career. Hopefully we'll see you in the Olympics someday.